In our last lesson, we looked at repeated notes and arpeggios used as background figuration. Now let's move on to scales. Here's an example. As was the case with repeated notes and arpeggios, the key here is to make the accompaniment interesting enough so as not to be monotonous, but not so demanding for the listener that it distracts from the main line. In this example, the little bits of scale are varied by occasional neighbor notes, as well as with rests. The difference in timbre between the fullness of the horn and the rather pale color of the low flute helps to keep the listener's oral priorities clear. Also note that the horn line is in longer, more sustained notes. All these differences, timbre, register, and rhythm, clearly establish the horn as the main line. Once again, this is an example of what I call quasi-counterpoint, accompanying part that goes beyond formulaic repetition to have a bit of personality, but not too much. Apart from quasi-counterpoint, there's one other kind of accompaniment texture which can be very useful as background at times: heterophony. If we look again at the first example from our last lesson, from my Fourth Symphony, we can see that although the harp and the vibraphone both have arpeggio figuration and they outline the same harmonies, the details of their contour aren't the same. The rhythm is also different. Heterophony is the name for a texture where two or more instruments have similar outlines, but are not just literally doubling each other. They provide richness, but they don't clutter up the texture as much as real counterpoint. They also avoid the heaviness of a simple doubled line. Heterophony is a very useful orchestration technique, and little examples of it are everywhere to be seen in classical orchestration. For example, the winds may just sustain some of the main notes in a string line. One instrument may lightly accent certain notes in another's line. Apart from figuration, the other kind of background that we see often is resonance. Resonance is what we hear when a pianist uses the pedal. In orchestration, one of the most prominent kinds of contrast is between sustained sound and short sounds. Think of the difference between a string phrase played legato and the same phrase played pizzicato, a completely different character. Since the orchestra has no pedal, when we want to create resonance in the orchestra, we must use sustained notes. If the resonance is meant as background, it must be the softest plaintive tone. Here's an example. Here we have a simple violin melody accompanied by a pizzicato bass. The contrast between the main line and the accompaniment is simple and effective. But if we wanted a richer texture, instead of adding counterpoint, we could add resonance in the violas. What prevents the violas from standing out too much, since they are similar in tone color to the violins? First, they're divided, so the sound is a bit thinner. Second, they're alone in the middle register, not competing with anybody else. Finally, wherever possible, I've sustained common tones in the harmony, so the viola part has very little activity. All other things being equal, activity attracts attention, so we try to keep the resonance part as static and as boring as possible. The student should look at some of the many rich examples of background figuration in the repertoire, like the beginning of Ravel's Naftas and Chloe Suite No. 2, or the coda to the last movement in Shostakovich's Last Symphony, trying to understand how they're constructed. Resonance can be found in most classical and romantic orchestral music, as well as Bartók, Shostakovich, and many other more recent composers. Always take note when composers change from dry sound to sustained sound. This is a simple contrast effect, easy to produce, and always effective.